The geopolitical landscape across the Middle East has entered a phase of unprecedented and dangerous volatility, pushing the regional security framework to the absolute brink of a massive multi-front and potentially uncontrollable explosion of violence. This dangerous escalation is primarily driven by the calculated and continued decision of the Israeli military establishment and the Israel Defense Forces to conduct high-intensity, direct armed incursions against the operational infrastructure, command centers, and personnel of the Hezbollah organization within the sovereign borders of Lebanon. These military operations, which include both precision-guided aerial strikes and specialized ground raids, have fundamentally altered the long-standing security equation in the Levant by targeting what it describes as immediate threats to its northern communities. The State of Israel has effectively redefined the rules of engagement in the region, an action that has drawn immediate, severe, and increasingly bellicose condemnation from the senior leadership within the Islamic Republic of Iran. Tehran has responded to these developments with a rapidly escalating series of sharp diplomatic warnings and overt military signals, asserting that a previously established, albeit informal, ceasefire agreement explicitly prohibited the State of Israel from conducting any form of military operations against Hezbollah's strategic assets. From the perspective of the Iranian government, these recent strikes represent a flagrant and intentional violation of international commitments and have effectively dismantled the fragile, temporary peace that many international mediators hoped would stabilize the region's borders. This perceived breach of trust and the subsequent collapse of the diplomatic understanding have placed the entire Middle Eastern theater in a state of high combat readiness, characterized by extreme strategic alarm and the mobilization of various paramilitary and conventional forces across multiple nations. The reaction from the Iranian government was almost instantaneous and was characterized by a strategic shift in posture that could have profound and lasting implications for the global economy and international energy security. Tehran has openly and repeatedly discussed the possibility of closing the Strait of Hormuz, a move that would effectively sever the primary maritime artery for the global transportation of crude oil and liquefied natural gas as a narrow and difficult to navigate waterway that facilitates the passage of a significant portion of the world's daily energy supply. Any disruption to the freedom of navigation within the strait could send immediate and devastating shockwaves through international financial markets. The mere suggestion of such a blockade has already led to increased insurance premiums for maritime shipping and has forced global energy analysts to reconsider their projections for the coming fiscal quarters. In stark and baffling contrast to the escalating rhetoric and the undeniable military maneuvers observed on the ground, the administration in the United States of America maintains a surprisingly optimistic and persistent public stance. Washington continues to assert in its official briefings that the ceasefire framework remains functional and is being implemented according to the original plan, despite the clear and mounting signs of kinetic military escalation. This widening disconnect between the diplomatic narrative provided by American officials at the State Department and the brutal reality of the conflict as it unfolds in the hills of southern Lebanon and the suburbs of Beirut has created a sense of profound uncertainty, many are questioning whether the American administration is privy to back-channel communications that suggest a de-escalation, or if the public narrative is simply out of sync with the rapidly deteriorating security environments. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, has added his significant voice to the growing chorus of international leaders calling for immediate restraint, a cessation of hostilities, and a return to the path of diplomatic dialogue. Speaking from a position of regional concern, he has emphasized that the continued violation of ceasefire terms and the disregard for sovereign borders threaten to undermine the very spirit of the peace process. He has called upon the United Nations and other international bodies to intervene more forcefully to prevent the situation from spiraling into a total war. However, these pleas for calm and a return to the status quo appear increasingly fragile and ineffective as the momentum of the crisis accelerates beyond the reach of traditional diplomatic intervention and institutional mediation. The situation has taken an even more perilous and direct turn, with the confirmation from various Iranian military sources that the armed forces are currently preparing for a series of coordinated retaliatory strikes against specific Israeli targets. These preparations, which involve the movement of ballistic missile batteries and the activation of long-range drone units, are being framed by Tehran as an inevitable, justified, and necessary response to the perceived aggression in Lebanon. This development suggests that the conflict is no longer confined to the shadows of proxy engagements or limited skirmishes, but is rapidly and dangerously evolving into a direct confrontation between major regional powers. The shift from using regional affiliates to employing direct state-on-state military force marks a crossing of a significant red line that is held for several decades. The scope of the conflict has also expanded in unexpected and highly concerning directions, with the nation of Kuwait suddenly finding itself drawn into the center of the regional storm. Critical infrastructure within Kuwait, including essential cyber networks, communication hubs, and physical utility facilities, has reportedly come under a series of sophisticated attacks. This expansion of the combat zone beyond the immediate borders of the primary combatants indicates that the theater of war is widening in ways that few strategic analysts had originally predicted. The targeting of a traditionally neutral or mediating state like Kuwait highlights the total breakdown of regional norms and the willingness of actors to strike targets of economic and symbolic importance. Reports emerging from the Kuwaiti Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Defense suggest that several vital facilities belonging to the Kuwait National Petroleum Corporation have been targeted by sophisticated unmanned aerial vehicles. These attacks, which are believed by some intelligence sources to have originated from Iranian territory or from platforms controlled by Iranian-aligned groups, have caused significant operational disruptions and localized damage. In response, the Kuwaiti government has been forced to implement emergency security protocols, including the deployment of air defense systems around key industrial zones to safeguard the continued operation of its most essential national assets. The psychological impact on the Kuwaiti population has been significant as the reality of the war reaches their doorstep for the first time in years. Of particular and grave concern are reports indicating that 3 separate, massive desalination plants in Kuwait may have been specifically targeted during these recent drone operations. In a region where natural freshwater resources are almost non-existent and the climate is among the harshest on Earth, these desalination facilities represent the very lifeblood of the nation and its civilian population. They are the sole source of potable water for millions of people. Any sustained or significant damage to these plants would not only be a military setback, but could also precipitate a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions. The targeting of such critical life support systems indicates a move toward total war, where the distinction between military and civilian survival is being erased. From the perspective of international law and the established norms of armed conflict, the deliberate targeting of essential civilian infrastructure is a matter of grave international concern. Such actions could be viewed as clear violations of the Geneva Conventions, specifically those protocols designed to protect the civilian population and the objects indispensable to their survival. Legal experts suggest that these strikes may even constitute crimes against humanity if they result in widespread suffering, displacement, or death among non-combatants. The targeting of these facilities underscores the degree to which the current conflict has moved beyond traditional military boundaries and entered a realm where the civilian population is being used as a strategic lever. On the other side of the regional divide, the leadership in Tehran has made it increasingly and publicly clear that they no longer consider the previously negotiated ceasefire agreement to be in effect or legally binding. Recent official statements from the Supreme National Security Council suggest that the Islamic Republic of Iran is moving toward a massive, multi-layered military response to the Israeli operations in Lebanon. This shift in posture signals the beginning of a new and highly unpredictable cycle of escalation that could involve multiple fronts, including the Golan Heights and the borders of Lebanon. The transition from diplomatic maneuvering to kinetic preparation suggests that the window for a negotiated settlement is closing rapidly. Information provided by Iranian state media paints a picture of extreme tension and national mobilization. Reports are circulating that the ceasefire was definitively broken following a series of mysterious and powerful explosions near the capital city of Tehran. While the full extent and origin of these incidents remain difficult to verify, the rhetoric from Iranian leaders has become noticeably more confrontational and uncompromising. The strategic landscape is shifting from a state of managed, low-level tension to one of overt and direct hostility, where the primary goal is no longer deterrence, but the infliction of significant costs. The Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, has issued a stern and unambiguous ultimatum regarding the current state of affairs and the perceived role of the United States in the deepening crisis. During a press conference, he stated that Washington must now make a definitive choice between a genuine, verifiable cessation of hostilities or a continued state of war through its support for Israel. He argued passionately that the world is witnessing a massacre in Lebanon and that the ultimate responsibility for stopping the bloodshed lies squarely with the American administration. His words reflect a deep-seated belief in Tehran that the United States is the primary architect of the current instability. This statement serves as a strategic warning that places immense and immediate pressure on Washington to re-evaluate its regional policy and its relationship with the Israeli government. Iran has emphasized that the United States and its allies had previously agreed to a comprehensive regional ceasefire that was intended to include the situation in Lebanon and the activities of Hezbollah. However, the reality on the battlefield has proven to be the exact opposite of these diplomatic promises, leaving the entire diplomatic agreement on the verge of total, irreparable collapse. The Iranian leadership appears to be signaling that it will no longer accept a dual-track approach where diplomacy is discussed in Western capitals while military action continues unabated. A significant portion of the current complexity stems from the unique and perhaps fatally flawed legal and diplomatic nature of the ceasefire agreement itself. Crucially, the State of Israel was not a direct participant in the high-level negotiations and is not a formal signatory to the documents that were drafted and initialed between the United States and Iran. When a diplomatic framework is constructed without the direct involvement of a primary stakeholder like Israel, the likelihood of that framework being ignored or intentionally undermined is exceptionally high. This structural flaw has created a situation where the parties responsible for the fighting are not the ones who agreed to the peace. This fundamental paradox has created a massive and widening hole in the current diplomatic structure as the government in Tel Aviv feels no obligation to adhere to terms it never accepted. Consequently, Israel has continued to pursue its own strategic objectives against Hezbollah with increasing intensity, viewing the organization as an existential and direct threat to its national security. This disconnect has rendered the nominal ceasefire almost entirely unenforceable in a practical sense, as the primary actors on the ground are operating under entirely different sets of rules and objectives. The consequences of these diplomatic shortcomings are now becoming painfully apparent as the region slides toward a wider war, with Israel maintaining its aggressive aerial campaign deeper into Lebanese territory. Iran prepares its military forces for a massive counterstrike, effectively restarting the cycle of violence that the ceasefire was supposed to prevent. This situation serves as a classic example of a strategic failure where a trilateral mechanism was attempted without securing the necessary consensus from all key actors. Within Iran itself, the domestic situation has become increasingly uncertain as reports of internal incidents, sabotage, and mysterious accidents begin to surface with greater frequency. The Mehr news agency has reported on various explosions and the frequent activation of air defense systems in the vicinity of Tehran and other major industrial centers. In the modern era of hybrid warfare, it is possible that some of these reports are intended to increase psychological pressure or serve as a pretext for further military action. The atmosphere in the Iranian capital is described as one of quiet preparation for a coming storm. Another concerning development involves reports of a major fire at a critical oil refinery. If these reports of attacks on strategic energy infrastructure are confirmed, it would provide further evidence that the ceasefire has completely lost its practical validity. The targeting of energy assets is a sign that the conflict is escalating into a total war scenario where economic targets are considered fair game. The Iranian military has also claimed to have shot down an advanced Israeli-made Hermes 900 unmanned aerial vehicle over the province of Fars. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has used this incident to send a direct warning to both Israel and the United States regarding violations of Iranian sovereign airspace. This incident highlights the fragility of the regional peace and the high probability of direct kinetic engagement between the primary powers. When viewing the situation in its entirety, it becomes clear that the ceasefire agreement is disintegrating at an alarming and perhaps irreversible rate. Some reports suggest that the initial terms of the agreement were violated within only 20 minutes of its supposed commencement, as both sides continued military maneuvers. The frequency and scale of these violations have only increased over time, moving from small-scale skirmishes to large-scale aerial bombardments and targeted assassinations. The ceasefire has become a term used only in diplomatic circles, bearing no resemblance to the reality of the missiles and drones crossing the skies. The root of the problem lies in a fundamentally flawed diplomatic process that failed to account for the core security concerns and strategic imperatives of all parties involved. By reaching an agreement with Iran while failing to secure the approval of Israel, the United States created a hollow framework destined to fail under real-world pressure. This reflects a systemic issue in how modern international diplomacy is conducted, particularly when dealing with long-standing regional rivalries where trust is non-existent. The reliance on indirect mediation has once again proven to be an insufficient tool for preventing major conflicts. The current state of affairs has left the United States in a difficult position. The credibility of American mediation is at stake, as the mechanism it established has failed to prevent a major and dangerous escalation of hostilities. The failure of the ceasefire has raised questions about the potential for a much larger conflict that could draw American forces back into a direct combat role. The situation is further complicated by the de facto blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which has effectively restricted the flow of maritime traffic through a sensitive economic corridor. Shipping data indicates that the number of commercial vessels passing through the strait has dropped to near zero, with the Iranian naval presence making the risk unacceptable. This blockade represents a catastrophic failure of the ceasefire's goals, which were to ensure the freedom of navigation and the stability of the global energy market. The economic cost of this closure is accumulating by the hour. Strategic analysts estimate that the ceasefire framework could completely vanish within the next 72 hours. Such a development would have severe consequences for the global energy market, with the prices of crude oil expected to rise sharply and potentially reach historic highs. The economic fallout of a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz could trigger a global recession affecting consumers, industries, and governments across the entire planet. In response to the high probability of conflict, the United States military has significantly increased its logistical activity and force posture within the Central Command area. A steady stream of heavy transport aircraft, including the C-5 Galaxy, has been observed moving advanced military equipment and munitions into various bases across the region. This surge in military logistics suggests that Washington is preparing for a wide range of contingencies, including the defense of key allies or a protracted regional conflict. While the Middle East remains the focus, significant developments are also taking place in Eastern Europe, where Ukrainian forces have targeted Russian logistical supply lines. These precision strikes, utilizing long-range drones and missile systems, have focused on destroying the transport infrastructure that the Russian Federation relies on in Crimea. One significant development was the successful Ukrainian attack on a vital railway ferry known as the Avianen, which carried fuel tankers and rail cars filled with ammunition. By removing this maritime asset, the Ukrainian military has effectively severed a vital supply artery that the Russian army used to transport fuel and heavy equipment. The loss of the ferry system forces the Russian military to rely on the Kerch Bridge, a massive engineering project that has proven to be highly vulnerable to strikes. This creates a dangerous bottleneck in the Russian supply chain and places their entire military presence in Crimea in an increasingly precarious and unsustainable position. The ability of the Russian Federation to maintain its defensive posture is directly tied to the stability of these transport routes, which are now under constant threat. The logistical pressure on the Russian military is mounting as their options for moving essential supplies into the combat zone continue to shrink and become more dangerous. The land corridor through occupied territory is now also coming under increased threat from Ukrainian long-range artillery and partisan activity, leading to logistical starvation. The technological evolution of the war is evident in the use of first-person viewed drones, which have become an indispensable tool for conducting precision strikes against high-value equipment. In the Luhansk region, Ukrainian forces have used these inexpensive weapons to target Russian power plants, command posts, and other critical infrastructure. These drones allow for a level of tactical precision that effectively democratizes precision-guided warfare on the modern battlefield, systemic and relentless in degrading infrastructure. By targeting energy facilities and transport hubs, the Ukrainian military is hollowing out the Russian logistical base, making it difficult to maintain equipment or provide services. This strategy of attrition is designed to make the continued occupation of Ukrainian territory increasingly costly and militarily impossible for the Russian government to sustain. As the Russian military struggles to adapt to these tactical realities, the overall stability and morale of their front lines are being called into question by many observers. Many Russian units are reportedly facing chronic shortages of essential supplies, and the constant threat of drone strikes has created a debilitating psychological burden. The cumulative effect of these challenges is a visible erosion of Russia's ability to conduct large-scale offensive operations, forcing them into a defensive and reactive posture. Back in the Middle East, the cycle of violence shows no signs of slowing down as the underlying causes of the conflict remain entirely unaddressed by diplomatic effort. The failure of the diplomatic process has left a vacuum of authority being filled by raw military force and a might makes right approach from all sides. The international community is watching with growing horror as two volatile regions continue to slide toward deeper, more destructive, and more unpredictable levels of conflict. The potential for these two separate conflicts to intersect and influence one another is a growing concern for global security experts and policymakers. The involvement of major powers in both theaters creates a complex, interconnected, and highly dangerous global security environment with far-reaching consequences. In conclusion, the world is facing a period of extreme instability and danger, with the potential for major regional wars to break out and merge simultaneously. The failure of traditional diplomacy to provide a lasting solution has left the international community in a state of deep uncertainty and fear regarding the future. As military forces mobilize and rhetoric intensifies, the hope for a peaceful, negotiated resolution to these crises appears to be fading rapidly into the background. The coming days will be critical in determining whether the world can find the collective will to pull back from the brink or if escalations will lead to violence. The strategic decisions made by leaders in Washington, Tehran, Tel Aviv, Moscow, and Kyiv will have a profound and lasting impact on the future of global security. For now, the situation remains fluid and unpredictable, with the potential for further world-altering surprises at every turn as the path to peace becomes obscured.